Yaakov continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, the land of Canaan. Here is the history of Yaakov. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flock with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. Once, when he was in the sons of Bela, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, he brought a bad report about them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph the most of all his children, because he had the son of his old age, and he made him a long-sleeved robe. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they began to hate him, reached the point where they couldn't even talk with him in a civil matter. Joseph had a dream which he told his brothers, and that made them hate him all the more. He said to them, "Listen, while I tell you about this dream of mine. We were tying up bundles of wheat in the field, and suddenly my bundle got up by itself and stood upright. Then your bundles came and gathered around mine and prostrated themselves before it." His brothers reported, "Yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around." And they hated him still more for his dreams and for what he said. He had another dream, which he told his brothers. "Here, I had another dream. There were the sun, the moons, and even the stars prostrating themselves before me." He told his father too, as well as his brothers, but his father rebuked him. "What is this dream you have had? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come and prostrate themselves before you on the ground?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. After this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, Israel asked Joseph, "Aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." He said to him, "Go, now, see whether things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring back word to me." So he sent him away to the Hebron valley, and he went to Shechem, where a man found him wandering around on the countryside. The man asked him, "Where are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," he answered. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the sheep?" The man said, "They've left here, because I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They spotted him in the distance. Before he had arrived where they were, they had already plotted to kill him. They said to each other, "Look, this dreamer is coming. So come now, let's kill him, throw him into one of these water cisterns here. Then we'll say some wild animal devoured him. We'll see then what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard this, he saved him from being destroyed by them. He said, "We shouldn't take his life. Don't shed his blood." Reuben added, "Throw him into the cistern here in the wilds, but don't lay hands on him yourselves." He intended to rescue him later and restore him to his father. So it was, when Joseph arrived to be with his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long-sleeved robe he was wearing, and took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, without any water in it. They sat down to eat their meal, but as they looked up, they saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelim coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with Aramaic gum, healing resin, and opium, and their way down to Egypt. Yehudah said to his brothers, "What advantage is this to us to kill our brother, cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Yishmaelim, instead of putting him to death with our own hands. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers paid attention to him. So when the Medium merchants passed by, they drew and lifted Joseph up out of the cistern and stole him for a half a pound of silver shekels to the Yishmaelim, who took Joseph on to Egypt. Reuben returned to the cistern, and upon seeing that Joseph wasn't in it, tore his clothes in mourning. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I go now?" They took Joseph's robe, killed a male goat, dipped the robe in blood. Then they sent the long-sleeve robe and brought it to their father, saying, "We found this. Do you know if it's your son's robe or not?" He recognized it and cried, "It's my son's robe. Some wild animal has torn Joseph in pieces and eaten him." Yaakov tore his clothes and, putting sackcloth around his waist, mourned for his son for many days. Though all his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, he refused all consolation, saying, "No, I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." And his father wept for him. In Egypt, the Midian sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, a captain of the guard. It was at this time that Yehudah went off from his brothers and settled near a man named Hirah, who was an Adulami. There Yehudah saw one of the daughters of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and slept with her. She conceived and had a son, whom he named She conceived again and had a son, and she called him Onan. Then she conceived again and had a son, whom she called Shelah. He was in Kazviv when she gave birth to him. Yehudah took a wife from his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Yehudah's firstborn, was evil from Adonai's perspective, so Adonai killed him. Yehudah said to Onan, "Go and sleep with your brother's wife. Perform the duty of a husband's brother to her, and preserve your brother's line of descent." However, Onan knew that the child would not count as his, so whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground, so as not to give her brother offspring. What he did was evil from Adonai's perspective, so he killed him too. Then Yehudah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Stay a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "I don't want him to die too, like his brothers." So Tamar went and lived at home with her father. In due time, Shauah's daughter, the wife of Yehudah, died. After Yehudah had been comforted, he went up to be with his sheep shearers and Timah. He and his friend Hirah, the Adulami. Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law has gone up to Timnah to shear the sheep." So she took off her widow's clothes, completely covered her face with a veil, and sat at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she still was not being given to him as wife. When Yehudah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, because she covered her face. So he went over to her where she was sitting and said, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, "Come, let me sleep with you." She answered, "What will you pay to sleep with me?" He said, "I will send you a kid from the flock of goats." She said, "Will you also give me something as a guarantee until you send it?" He answered, "What should I give you as a guarantee?" She said, "Your seal, with its cord and the staff you are carrying in your hand." So he gave them to her, then went to sleep with her, and she conceived by him. She got up and went away, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothes. Yehudah sent the kid with his friend, the Adulami, to receive the guarantee items back from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He asked the people near where she had been, "Where is the prostitute who was on the road at Enaim?" But they answered, "There hasn't been any prostitute here." So he returned to Yehudah and said, "I couldn't find her." Also the people said, "There hasn't been any prostitute here." Yehudah said, "All right, let her keep the things, so that we won't be publicly shamed. I sent the kid, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Yehudah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been acting like a whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of her prostitution." Yehudah said, "Bring her out. Let her be burned alive." When she was brought out, she sent the message to her father-in-law, I am pregnant by the man of whom these things belong. Determine, I beg you, whose these are, the signet, the cord, and staff. Then Yehuda, acknowledging owning them, he said, She is more righteous than I, because I didn't let her become the wife of my son Shelah. And he never slept with her again. When she went into labor, it became evident that she was going to have twins. At the time of labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread on it, saying, This one came out first. But then he withdrew the hand, and his brother came out. So she said, How did you manage to break out first? Therefore, he was named Peretz, breaking out. Then came out the brother with the scarlet thread on his hand. It was given the name Zerach, scarlet. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Yishalim, who had brought him there. Adonai was with Joseph, and he became wealthy while he was in the household of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw how Adonai was with him, that Adonai prospered everything he did. Joseph pleased him, and he served him, and his master appointed him manager of the household. He entrusted all his possessions to Joseph. From the time he appointed his manager of household and all his possessions, Adonai blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Adonai's blessing was on all he owned, whether in the house or in the field. So he left all his possessions in Joseph's care, and because he had him, he paid no attention to his affairs except for the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome as well. In time, the day came when his master's wife took a look at Joseph and said, Sleep with me. But he refused, saying to his master's wife, Look, because my master has me, he doesn't know what's going on in the house. He has put all his possessions in my charge. In this house, I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. Now then, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? But she kept pressing him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her, but refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men were living in the house, were indoors, she grabbed him by the robe and said, Sleep with me. But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand, and got himself outside. When she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and had escaped, she called the men of her house and said to them, Look at this. My husband brought in a Hebrew to make fools of us. He came in and wanted to sleep with me, but I yelled out loudly. When he heard me yelling like that, he left his robe with me and ran out. She put the robe aside until his master came home. Then she said to him, This Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me. When I yelled out, he left his robe with me and fled outside. When his master heard what his wife had said, as she showed him, Here's what your slave did to me, he became furious. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were kept, and there he was in prison. But Adonai was with Joseph, showing him grace and giving him favor in the sight of the prison warden. The prison warden made Joseph supervisor of all the prisoners in the prison, so that whatever they did there, he was in charge. The prison warden paid no attention to anything Joseph did because Adonai was with him. Whatever he did, Adonai prospered. Sometime later, it came about that the Egyptian king's cupbearer and baker gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh became angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. But he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, in the same place where Joseph was kept. The captain of the guard charged Joseph to be with them. He became their attendant while they remained in prison. One night, the two of them, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and his baker, there in prison, both had dreams. Each dream was its own meaning. Joseph came into them in the morning and saw that they had looked sad. He asked Pharaoh's officers there with them in the prison of the master's house, "Why are you looking so sad today?" They said to him, "We each had a dream, and there's no one around who can interpret it." Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. "In my dream, there in front of me was a vine, and the vine had 3 branches. The branches budded, and it suddenly began to blossom, and finally clusters of ripe grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph said to him, "Here is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will be giving Pharaoh his cup, as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when all goes well with you, and show me kindness, please, and mention me to Pharaoh, so that he will release me from this prison. For the truth that I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing wrong that would justify putting me in this dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I too saw in my dream. There were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the uppermost basket, there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds ate them out of the basket of my head." Joseph answered, "Here is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off of you. He will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you." On the 3rd day, which Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a party for all the officials. He lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among the officials. He restored the chief cupbearer back to his position, so that he again gave Pharaoh his cup, but he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Nevertheless, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.